In an industry fueled by ego and constant visibility, Catherine O'Hara did something quietly radical. She didn't fight to be the biggest star in the room. She fought for the right to leave it. When the news broke in January 2026 that she had passed away, tributes poured in. Most of them focused on her late career renaissance in Schitt's Creek and the unforgettable presence of Moira Rose. But very few people stopped to ask about the years in between. There is a long stretch in her career where the blockbusters thin out and the red carpets grow distant. A period when the industry's spotlight seemed to move on, and she did not chase it. After the worldwide success of Home Alone and the cult status of Beetlejuice, Catherine O'Hara appeared to step sideways just as her visibility could have exploded. At a time when Hollywood rewarded constant exposure, she became selective, careful, and at times nearly absent from the mainstream conversation. Some observers wondered if she had been pushed out by an industry known for sidelining women over 40. Others assumed she simply preferred smaller roles, but neither explanation captures the intent behind her choices. She wasn't retreating because she lacked opportunity. She was retreating because she valued something more than opportunity. Welcome to a story that isn't built on scandal, but on a kind of decision that is rare in Hollywood. Catherine O'Hara turned down visibility, money, and global momentum, not because she feared success, but because she had identified a trap early in her career and refused to walk into it. She made a personal rule, and she kept it for decades. Most people believe they understand the arc of her career. They see the early comedy brilliance, the beloved film roles, the later television resurgence. What they don't see is the quiet conditions she reportedly set for nearly every director and producer who wanted to hire her during those quieter years. It wasn't about salary. It wasn't about billing. It wasn't about creative control. It was about two people in her life who mattered more than any award, premiere, or headline. To understand why she chose to become less visible at the height of her recognition, you have to look at the Hollywood landscape she was navigating in the early 1990s. This was a time of relentless ambition. Stars built careers through constant exposure. Publicity cycles never stopped. The rule for women in the industry was unspoken but clear. Take every role you can before the spotlight moves on. Stay visible. Stay desirable. Never say no. Around her, performers like Madonna were conquering global stages with non-stop tours. Sharon Stone was redefining celebrity after Basic Instinct. Meryl Streep was cementing her reputation through back-to-back major films. The pace was aggressive and the expectation was clear. If you are a woman over 30, you run as fast as you can before the industry decides you are no longer essential. Catherine O'Hara stood at that exact crossroads. The enormous success of Home Alone had made her one of the most recognizable mothers in America. She could have capitalized on that visibility in a way that would have kept her constantly in the public eye. Instead, she began doing something that confused people around her. She started saying no. Agents saw a clear path for Catherine O'Hara in the early 1990s. After the success of Home Alone, she could have stepped easily into leading roles across major studio comedies. The offers were there. The momentum was real. The industry was ready to turn her into the next dominant face of comedic film. But while many of her peers were fighting for more screen time, Catherine did something that puzzled people around her. She didn't chase the momentum. She slowed it down. In 1992, she married production designer Bo Welch, and not long after, her focus shifted in a way that surprised industry observers. Awards, premieres, and visibility no longer ranked as high as they once had. Raising her two sons, Matthew and Luke, quietly moved to the center of her priorities. It was around this time that Catherine began following a personal rule that would shape the next 2 decades of her career. She would not accept work that kept her away from her family for long periods. From the outside, this looked like a career losing momentum. Some critics speculated that perhaps her peak had passed. Others assumed the industry had simply moved on. But the truth was far more deliberate. Catherine didn't stop working. She changed how she worked. She found an alternative that allowed her to remain creatively active without sacrificing her time at home: voice acting. During years when her on-screen appearances became less frequent, Her voice quietly appeared in animated projects and recordings. This allowed her to spend hours in a studio and still return home in time for dinner, routines, and daily life with her children. Voice work offered a rare balance. She could exercise her craft without stepping fully into the demanding cycle of location shoots, press tours, and long productions. While other actors were traveling constantly and missing family milestones, Catherine built a rhythm centered around presence at home. This was not a retreat from ambition. It was a redefinition of it. She chose to be present for school mornings, family trips, and everyday routines that many in her position simply could not prioritize. If a production could not guarantee that she would be home on weekends, she declined politely. No drama, no public explanation, just a quiet decision repeated consistently. What some film historians later described as a quiet period in her career was, in many ways, one of her most intentional chapters. She was protecting her children from growing up surrounded by constant attention and industry pressure. She wanted Matthew and Luke to know her first as a mother, not as a public figure. This kind of choice is difficult to make alone. Turning away from the machinery of fame requires a partner who values privacy just as deeply. Behind Catherine's ability to make these decisions was her long partnership with Bo Welch, a man who was equally uninterested in the spotlight. Their relationship provided a stable environment where stepping away from visibility did not feel like sacrifice, but like balance. Their story began years earlier, in 1988, on the set of Beetlejuice. In the middle of a chaotic, surreal production, they formed a connection that would quietly anchor the rest of her life. It is one of Hollywood's quieter ironies that such a steady partnership was forged in such an eccentric setting. Bo Welch was the production designer responsible for bringing Tim Burton's Gothic vision to life on the set of Beetlejuice. While CatherineOHara was in front of the camera as Delia Dietz, dramatic, frantic, and wonderfully eccentric, Bo was quietly behind the scenes building the physical world she moved through. He designed the walls, the rooms, the strange visual language of the film. In many ways, he was the architect of the madness she performed inside. On the surface, their personalities seemed almost opposite. Catherine was vibrant, expressive, and filled every room with energy. Bo was reserved, thoughtful, and more comfortable behind a drafting table than in front of attention. He was known as a man of few words whose work spoke for him. The beginning of their relationship was understated in a way that fit them both. Despite working on the same set for weeks, Bo reportedly felt too shy to approach her. It eventually took a nudge from Tim Burton himself to encourage him to ask Catherine out. That small push led to a connection that would quietly outlast many higher-profile relationships in their industry. When they married in 1992, they didn't just combine two lives. They combined two very different creative minds. Bo went on to design the iconic visual worlds of films like Edward Scissorhands and Batman Returns, becoming widely respected in his own field. Yet when the workday ended, both of them shared the same instinct: to leave the fantasy behind at the studio gate. They made an unspoken agreement to keep their private life separate from their public careers. Their marriage was never turned into a public story. They did not build a brand around it. They protected it. Bo became, in many ways, the quiet architect of Catherine's personal world. While some celebrity spouses might have encouraged greater visibility or a more ambitious lifestyle, Bo understood something essential about her. He recognized that her comedic brilliance came from a place of deep sensitivity and observation, that she needed calm and privacy to recharge. When she began turning down work during the years their children were young, he supported her without hesitation. He saw the value she placed on being present at home and never treated it as a sacrifice. To him, the role of an engaged parent carried more meaning than any role offered by a casting director. Together, they created a space where Catherine could step away from her characters and simply be herself. A place where the only people she needed to impress were her husband and her two sons. For more than 3 decades, they remained one of the quieter constants in an industry known for short-lived relationships. While others navigated publicity cycles and public scrutiny, they measured time in shared routines, breakfasts, evenings, and family life away from cameras. Bo was the steady presence beside her during the years she kept Hollywood at a distance. He never asked her to be more visible or more ambitious than she wanted to be. But as time passed, their children grew older, the house became quieter, and the industry that Catherine had stepped away from slowly began calling her back. The nest was emptying. The timing, for the first time in decades, felt right, and the person who drew CatherineOHara back into the spotlight wasn't a studio executive or a casting director. It was someone from her past, a comedic soulmate who understood her rhythms better than almost anyone. If Bo Welch anchored her private life, Eugene Levy illuminated her public one. Their connection stretched back to the 1970s in Toronto's comedy scene, long before fame. They had briefly dated, then quickly realized something rarer. They worked best as creative partners and lifelong friends. Over the years, while Catherine stepped back to focus on family, Eugene was one of the few who fully understood why. He respected her silence because he knew her character. He never pushed, he never asked when she'd return, he simply waited. When her sons, Matthew and Luke, were grown and the house had grown quieter, Eugene approached her with an idea for a modest television project, not a blockbuster, not a prestige drama, a small comedy called Schitt's Creek. But he knew better than to offer her a standard role. He knew she wouldn't come back to play something ordinary. So he offered her freedom. He invited her to build the character of Moira Rose from the ground up, with complete creative control. And Catherine accepted with an intensity that surprised even those who knew her best. She didn't just perform Moira, she constructed her. She invented the now famous unplaceable accent, a blend of old Hollywood elegance, theatrical grandeur, and something entirely her own. She insisted on the wigs, treating them not as costume pieces but as emotional armor. Each hairstyle reflected Moira's state of mind. Each wardrobe choice became part of the storytelling. This was the creative force that had been quietly waiting for years, now fully unleashed. The chemistry between Catherine and Eugene on screen felt effortless because it was built on decades of trust. Their banter didn't feel rehearsed. It felt lived in. Watching them argue, comfort, and confuse each other wasn't just acting. It was a rhythm only two people with a shared comedic history could create. Catherine brought something new into the role, too. The patience of a mother. The steadiness of someone who had lived a full life outside the industry. Moira was outrageous, yes, but also deeply human. The success of Schitt's Creek did more than earn awards and global recognition. It validated a decision Catherine had made 20 years earlier. Her talent hadn't faded during her time away. It had matured, sharpened, and gained depth. She didn't return to Hollywood as someone chasing relevance. She returned as someone who had never lost it. When the curtain fell on Schitt's Creek and the applause reached its loudest point, CatherineOHara stepped into the final chapter of her life with a calm that few performers ever find. She had kept the promise she made decades earlier. She had honored her craft without letting it consume her, and she had honored her family without letting the industry pull her away. By the time January 30th, 2026 arrived, the world was saying goodbye to a comedy legend. Inside her Los Angeles home, however, the moment felt very different. Standing beside her were three people who did not know her as a star, but as the center of their lives: her husband, Bo Welch, and their sons, Matthew and Luke. For years, Hollywood had quietly puzzled over the long stretch where Catherine seemed less present in the spotlight. In that room, the answer was undeniable. The gap in her career was never a disappearance. It was a decision. While others chased awards, premieres, and constant visibility, Catherine invested her time in something that does not age or fade: being present, school mornings, shared dinners, long talks, small daily routines that never make headlines but define a family's life. In her final hours, the result of that choice stood right beside her. So often, stories about public figures end with isolation, large homes filled with awards but empty of closeness. Catherine's story unfolded in the opposite direction. The two young men holding her hands were not symbols. They were the living proof of years she had chosen to prioritize connection over attention. It invites a different way of looking at her life and career. Not by counting how many roles she took, but by remembering how many she turned down. Not by measuring visibility, but by recognizing intention. She stepped away from the noise to protect something real. She traded constant attention for steady presence. In doing so, she achieved something rare in an industry that often pulls people away from themselves. She stayed grounded. Her life showed that it is possible to step back without fading, to pause without disappearing, and to return without regret. The years that looked quiet from the outside were full in ways that mattered far more to her. As audiences say goodbye to the characters she made unforgettable, it is worth remembering the person behind them. CatherineOHara demonstrated that success does not have to be loud to be meaningful. That talent can deepen alongside love, routine, and family. She did not miss out. She chose carefully. And through those choices, she left behind something more lasting than fame, a life defined by balance, intention, and care. Her performances will continue to make people laugh, but the quiet example she set may endure even longer.